I want to do a quick video to talk about modern IT, what it is and how it's transitioned over the last few years. So I've got a couple of slides I've put together today, part of a previous presentation I've done, but it gives a really good conceptual sort of view as to where IT was and where it is now, and equally if you're starting a business or transitioning, what that future IT might look like. So your traditional sort of IT approach would be that you would have a server. That could be a collection of servers that span across multiple sites. It could be one server that is hosting virtual servers, but at the core you would have some form of server. This is like a traditional network of 10 users plus, I guess, people that would need to centralize their data. And the way it would traditionally work is you would have your business data all stored on your server drives. You would have the security managed by the server itself. That could be security of like the domain environment that the server creates, putting group policies out. You would essentially centralize that security in the server environment. That could be industry software, so whether you're an accounting practice and you have your account software on there, you're manufacturing and you have your manufacturer software on there, but you would put that software on the server. You would also, your Microsoft, any applications you had, Word, Excel, yes, they would be installed on the PCs, but ultimately managed by the server as well. Remote workers would connect into that server environment via a VPN most likely, or a terminal server if you've heard those terms. But essentially you would connect into that server environment to allow remote users to work. The server environment would also manage the PCs and the user accounts for the login process, for authentication. So that would also be held by the server. And if you can't quite see that box there, emails as well. So you'd have what we call an Exchange server previously, which all your emails would go into the server, then be distributed out to your clients. Talking a little bit further about that, so to have that server environment, obviously you'd have to purchase the server, you'd have to purchase licenses, CALs, again, different form of licensing. You'd have to protect the server with a cabinet, most likely, and a UPS, which is a big battery. You'd have to have it well air conditioned because it could overheat. You'd have to invest in some form of redundancy, whether it's backup tape drives back in the day or USB drives, a bit more modern. And ultimately nowadays it's mostly cloud backups. But also your hard drives in the server, you'd have to have some form of mirror or RAID 5 configuration. So if one hard drive died, your data wasn't lost. Most people would have multiple servers for multiple roles called virtual machines. You also have a firewall for blocking access for anyone trying to get into the network from external, and then you'd have to set up VPNs for your actual remote workers to log into. And then it would be very internet dependent. So basically, if your internet went down at the site, yes, the local PCs could still connect and work. However, anyone on the outside would not be able to connect to the server or the firewall. So maybe in some some organisations where remote working was more prevalent, they might have backup internet lines, that sort of thing. And you'd have to probably replace the hardware every 3 to 6 years. But it really wasn't designed for flexibility. I mean, you could make it flexible with a heavy investment, but that is the concept of the previous, where IT was. Nowadays, there are quite a few options. I'm going to talk about the Microsoft 365 route. So everything in the Microsoft 365 sort of environment is, you have your security policies on. Those security and compliance policies sit in different dashboards, but at the core concept, security is managed in the 365 sort of center, and that can be anything from identity to data security to the login process, encryption, everything. And then what would happen is nowadays, your file structure, your file storage can be in the SharePoint and OneDrive environment. In fact, I'll start flicking through here. So yes, your business data, where would previously be sat on that server, will now be more than likely, if in the 365 route, on the SharePoint and OneDrive environment. Then your emails would be directly in Exchange Online, which is part of the 365 license anyway. Your remote workers would be able to log in to their SharePoint to get their data. They'd be able to log in to get their emails via Exchange Online, and they'd be able to access all the Microsoft applications directly from their computer. Managing the PCs and users can be done through the 365 dashboard, and also part of Azure Active Directory and other things within the Azure environment, but it's all part of 365. And then your industry specific software, there are a couple of options with how you would do this. So if there's a cloud version of that software, great, just have the cloud version, and then you don't need to sort of try and incorporate it in any Azure environment. If that server that the software's on is looking to be replaced or needs replacement, at that point you could consider actually moving that server role into an Azure. Therefore, it is then in the cloud and more readily accessible. But this is what an IT network now looks like. It is essentially, you have 365 licenses, Microsoft 365 accounts, and then you have access to all the applications. And to put that into perspective a little bit, everyone knows the familiar Microsoft apps like your Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Publisher, Access, all the sort of traditional applications. But these days there are more collaborative tools like Microsoft Teams, like SharePoint. I talk a bit more about those in different sort of videos and different blogs and that sort of thing. I'm happy to have that discussion if anyone wants to have it. Communication is still within Outlook, in the Outlook environment, but also now Teams is become that communication piece. And you've got additional apps like Planner, like To Do, the apps you can see there. Lists as well is another relatively new one. There's more apps always being released, but these days the security, a lot of it comes down to the actual identity and protecting that identity of the person. That can be MFA there, which is multi-factor authentication. Most of you have seen it in some fashion where you put a code into your phone to prove you are who you are, which will stop actually 99.9% of hack attacks if you've got that MFA. SSO is single sign-on, meaning that you can use a single account, like a Microsoft 365 account, to then link it to other accounts, like LinkedIn, for example, where you've got one login now that covers multiple accounts, but you protect that login. They are moving towards the passwordless environment where you use an authenticator app or biometric, some form of biometric to prove you are who you are, which again, an extra layer of security. But then you've got other stuff as well. Now, I'm not going to delve too deep into like conditional access. But again, it's more for protecting the login experience and notifying administrators if there's a suspicious login, or to even challenge that login. Retention policies where you are stating in the Microsoft environment that your data has to stay for a certain term, for example 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, that data is actually kept, even if it's deleted and then deleted out the recycle bin, that data is kept. You've got sensitivity labels, which are you classify your data, so you could put it as highly sensitive, meaning that only certain people would be able to access that, even if it left your organization. So if someone accidentally emailed or shared a file that was actually classed as sensitive to your organization, no one else would be able to open it because it would be encrypted. But the core concept of modern IT is that it's flexible, that you're able to log in from anywhere on any device. Modern IT, it comes down to that in the Microsoft world, at least, to that 365 license, to having all these applications at your fingertips, to be able to have your Outlook for your emails, Teams for your internal communication, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, the apps the productivity apps that people are familiar with, and combining in those new ones. But basically, the servers are sort of a bit old hat now. They do have their use cases, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, serverless, as in a serverless environment, is the new normal in IT. And if that's something you're interested in and want to chat more, I'm here to help.